Hi everyone, this is Mary Boo with the North American Council on Adoptable Children. I'm pleased to welcome you to a webinar brought to you by Advocates for Families First, a collaboration of NACAC, the National Foster Parent Association, and Generations United. Our presenter today will be Kim Stevens, who is Director of Advocates for Families First and has been working with parent support groups for many, many years. Before we get started, before I turn it over to Kim, I just want to let you know that everyone will be on mute during the session. So if you have any questions that you want to ask him, you'll type them in the question box, which is in your GoToWebinar control panel. You type them there. I'll be paying attention to them. If it's a simple question, I will answer it myself or just let you know what's going on. Otherwise, Kim will break periodically for questions. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Kim now.
Hi, welcome, and thank you for joining the webinar. As Mary said, this is it is our first webinar for Advocates for Families First, and we're going to be doing a series of them. Every month there'll be a new one that you'll get information about. We decided on the webinar topics based on a survey that we sent out in the last couple of months, wanting to hear from caregiver support groups and organizations about what their needs were in terms of technical assistance. So as I said, this is the first one. It was one that we thought was a good basic place to start, and we also knew it was something that would be of interest to quite a few people, and our attendee numbers say that we were correct. So thank you very much for showing interest. The first thing I want to do with everybody is just ask you to participate in a couple of polls. The first one is about what your role is. If you look down on your GoToWebinar control panel, I've just launched a poll that tells us what your role is, and I'm going to leave that open for a little while I see people start to answer, and then I will close that one and let you know when another one comes up. So we do know that caregiver support groups is one of the best, most effective, and certainly most economical ways to support our caregivers. It's a hard job. I'll let you know, folks, that I am one of you. I'm a foster adoptive parent. I'm actively caring for a couple of grandkids in the hopes that I'm not a kinship provider as well. And I can probably silently hear people laughing in the background that attempted the same. So if you folks have any suggestions for me, I would be happy to hear those as well. I want to just start off with a couple of things that we want to keep in mind with this particular webinar. First of all, just to let you know that this is just a primer, however we want to pronounce it. Ourselves at NACAC and then others have done multiple day trainings on this kind of thing. Each little piece of the topic could take an hour if we were talking about facilitation, if we were talking about cultural humility, if we were talking about incorporating. Each one of those takes quite some time to go into detail. But this is just to give you an overview and help you, first of all, figure out where you are in the process, and also think about what are some issues that you hadn't even thought about yet. So important kind of things to think about. The second is I really want to help people consider what you call your group. We hear from everyone around the country that for a lot of folks, particularly for relatives providing care and for young people, the idea of going to a support group is a stigmatizing idea. It means that you're doing something wrong. It means that you need help. So a lot of folks are now using names like the coffee hour, grandma's night out, hosting a discussion group, something that feels like you're inviting them to be part of just a regular experience. Everybody's in this with you. It's normalizing, and it also indicates that you're going to find some like-minded folks in the room. So why do people come to a non-support group? They come to get information. They come to have the feeling of being around others that understand them. They want to normalize their feelings, or if they're feeling completely out of control, they just want the first step towards being able to normalize those feelings and experiences. They want to share what they know. They want to get advice, and they need a place where they can socialize with folks that understand what they've been through. Because by and large, folks in our communities have not necessarily had the same experiences as we have. There's also, what we know now, a definite evolution to the type of group that you're going to have. Most people we've seen will come to a group in the first place because they're feeling a great sense of frustration. They need a place to vent. They need other people that have been there and done that and can understand the agony and the anguish of what they're going through on a day-to-day basis, that can understand the frustration of trying to talk to a school system or a doctor or even a neighbor about things that seem really obvious to us and are yet so not obvious for those other folks. They also come from mutual support. And one of the greatest functions that you could do as a facilitator would be to help your groups move from that frustration and venting place, which they need to go through, but get them into a place where they're offering mutual support, where things are much more strength-based, and where you're not hearing the same stories again and again. I think probably all of us, myself included, have had that experience of joining a group, hoping that something is going to come of it that will be helpful, and then leaving that group because one or two folks are monopolizing the conversation over things that we've heard before. When you get a solid foot underneath you as a support group, a mutual support service, you start thinking about what else is out there that we need to do. What else can we be offering to our communities? And that's when we start getting into some service groups. Sorry, apologies for that. Service groups, you could open a food pantry, you could open a clothes closet. Some of the groups that we know that have been in place for quite some time are now licensing other resource families, or they're working to train social workers and other providers. And finally, you can become an advocacy group. And in that respect, you would be going to your state, county, provincial, or federal legislators and trying to provide information and advice for them to make whatever their laws, regulations, and procedures are work better to help our children and the families that care for them. Each one of these kinds of caregiver groups is going to have a unique reason for existence, a unique purpose, unique programs and services, and a unique structure. And it will be up to you as leaders to work together with your group to determine what those look like. Excuse me. So as we're talking about being group leaders, I want to ask you the second poll question, and that is whether or not you're currently running a support group. So if you could answer that one as well, that would be great. And please bear with me. I'm getting over a pretty serious cold. I'm going to try not to cough, but I know I will occasionally. So obviously your first task is to find other group members and to organize your first public meeting. You're going to have to figure out and you're going to have to take action on deciding on a location, day and time, publicity. You're going to have to plan an agenda. You're going to have to find new members, and hopefully you'll have folks that are willing to commit to the group even before they know what it is. Pardon me. I've always looked to friends and family to be those folks that will be my first go-to people. Probably there are some other adoptive, foster, or kinship caregivers who you've been talking with over time, and you may have decided together that you're going to want to launch. You need to write a mission statement so that folks know who you are and what you're all about. And I'm going to really encourage you from the very beginning to divide the work. You need to identify a number of different leaders. Pardon me. Oh, I'm so sorry. If the more that you can share the leadership, the more you're going to be supporting the sustainability and the growth of your group right from the beginning. So I would encourage you to assign, Mary, I'm sorry.
Kim, I'm sorry. Oh, Kim, do you want to mute for a second and I can chat a little bit about this?
Thank you. That's a great idea.
And just so folks know, we have Joe Kroll in the room here with me as well, and he could take over and talk about some of these things. We can't move the slides without Kim at the moment. But so again, just as Kim was saying, one of the keys is to divide the work. And we've seen over the years with NACAC, parent groups can really ebb and flow with, if they have one leader, that leader can either move to another job, their family can end up in crisis, or they can move and the whole group can disappear. And so we've talked a lot about the need to share the leadership so that no one is doing it alone. And this, again, as Kim's got outlined here, some of the good ways to do that are have different responsibilities for different people. And again, and I think it's still important to that they're all leaders, but one person might do evaluation work. One person might be in charge of surveying group members to make sure that people are getting their needs met. Another one might be in charge of doing outreach, calling local agencies and schools and posting flyers. Another person might be tracking membership dues if you have membership dues. Uh-oh. Kim slides. Kim, what are you doing? Another person might be in charge of facilitating the meeting or bringing treats. So again, just that's a really good way to have a strong group, is to have multiple people involved.
In our publication,
Hello.
on NACAC's publication that is on the internet on our website, nacac.org, there is a discussion of what we call circles of support, the whole notion of dividing the work and making sure there are multiple leaders involved. And this is a way to have multiple leaders and giving them well identified tasks. And it breaks down the workload so that you don't have to, a single leader doesn't try to carry everything.
Okay,
Kim, are you back?
I'm back. I think I'm back.
All right, holler if you need help.
Thank you so much. I haven't talked for 3 days, so I did not realize how difficult it would be. So, managing group meetings. Thank you, Joe and Mary, because you did a great job on that piece that I love you for. Just a few things to keep in mind. Obviously, we've just talked about the idea that every group member needs a role. The more they have a role, the more they're invested. Clearly, you're going to be thinking about how people interact with one another, how you act as a facilitator, what you do to keep yourself on task and on focus. You have to think about what the topics are that are going to be pertinent and interesting to your group. And you also need to make some decisions about how much of your support group is going to be devoted to offering support to one another, and how much of it is going to fulfill some of your training and education requirements for either licensure or, in fact, just for being able to do the best job that you can as a caregiver. You want to think about the structure of your meeting. Sorry, Mary, you're on.
Sure. Again, one of the things that is really important for a good meeting is that it's not just a free for all, and it's great to be able to go into a meeting with an idea of how you're going to start it. If it's a new group, you want to begin, make sure everyone there knows each other, and that there's maybe time to catch up with one another, what's happened in their families since the last meeting, what are the key issues they want to talk about that day, so that everyone's on the same page and you can kind of come to an agreement together about what you're going to talk about. And then obviously the middle of the meeting, you're going to talk about those things. You've come to a joint agenda and are going to go through it together. And in the end, I think one of the most important things to do is to make sure not let a meeting end just randomly, and have that, did people get their needs met? Are there things that need to carry forward to the next meeting? Is there homework for people to do between meetings? For example, if you've been talking about a different parenting technique, are people thinking about ways they can use that between sessions so people can come back and explore whether it worked or whether it didn't work? And then again, you may want to check in, how was this meeting for everybody? What worked well and what didn't? I think are really good ways to make sure the meeting meets the needs of everyone who's there and isn't just a venting or whining session, which we all know can happen and has its place, but it has to be important not to be the whole meeting. Kim, do you want to move slide? Or
Thank you, Mary. I think I'm going to try again. Two things to keep just in mind about beginning and end. It's very important to begin on time when you say you will, and to end on time when you say you will. And just always keep that in mind. So I spoke a little bit about balancing that idea of both support and education. I know one of the huge issues that families have is in terms of finding childcare for their kids while they're coming to group meetings. And we'll talk a little bit later on about fundraising and some ideas on how to meet that. All of us are raising kids at the same time as we're doing this work. So we have to build in some contingency plans around our own personal crises, which is one of the reasons why NACAC always encourages people to have co-leadership or a circle of leadership and know that there's somebody that can step in your place, as Mary and Joe have so wonderfully done for me with my personal coughing crisis. Um, and then finally, to really be very clear and very careful with yourself about self-care. We know that there's such a thing as burnout. We know that we get compassion fatigue. And fortunately or unfortunately as it is, those folks that do the most end up always doing the most. And it's quite easy to find yourself getting burnt out. Um, One of the things that we also like to tell people about is the idea of becoming a nonprofit organization as a group. Now, this also speaks to the kind of group you are. If you are an agency-supported group, you're probably not going to be thinking about doing nonprofit organization. And you have to balance and weigh what are the pros and cons about being an agency-supported group. The agency can provide you with resources. They can provide you with a place to meet, with folks to come to your meetings. At the same time, some people don't like to go back to the agencies for these groups, and oftentimes being a part of the agency can inhibit the kinds of things that you might want to advocate for or speak to. So when you get to a point where you're deciding whether or not to be a nonprofit organization, there are several things to think about. And NACAC has some very skilled technical assistance advisors that can help you with this in more detail. But I just want to go over a few of the both benefits and the things to think through as you're attempting this. Certainly, if you're a nonprofit organization, you can receive tax-exempt donations from folks. You can get in-kind and money and services from folks. You can apply for grants that otherwise would not be available to you. You can have reduced nonprofit mailing privileges. You can have sales tax exemptions. And it also makes you look more legitimate in terms of being an entity, a professional entity. If you're going to go in this direction, you need to be able to identify what your name and your mission statement are. You need to be able to identify the activities and services you offer. You'll need to elect officers and a board of directors. You need to have articles of incorporation and bylaws, both of which we have templates for you to use. And then you have to apply for your tax exempt status, which does include a fee. So including a fee also brings us to the importance of thinking about fundraising. So that 501c3, that nonprofit status, and there's another nonprofit status if we have folks listening from Canada, and I'm happy to follow up with you about how to do that with some of our Canadian partners. Once you've done this, it's very important that you treat your support group or your support organization as a business. You need to have very accurate and detailed financial records. You need to have a budget that you either follow or you can justify why you didn't follow it. You need to be able to identify potential and most likely funding sources. You're going to need to hold special events to raise money. You'll have to think about whether or not you're a dues-paying membership organization. Certainly, you'll have the ability to look for in-kind donations from community partners. And you're also going to want to start thinking about writing proposals and doing grant writing. And again, this could be a category of service that one of your support group members can offer to be the lead on. Every group has somebody that's a wordsmith, we hope, and they're going to be very helpful as you move forward. Now, I know from our poll, about 70% are folks that are currently running groups, and about 30% are hoping to run a group. I'd be willing to bet that out of that 70% that are, there's a good proportion of you that are hoping to get some ideas on how to rejuvenate your group. you've been around for a while, or you're brand new and you just don't feel like things are going in the direction that you want. You feel like you could get bigger and better if you only could fill in the blank. So one of the things that I always do when I'm working with a group of people that seems at first a little bit off topic, but I have found it's very, very helpful, is to even just do a talent scouting within your group. Find out what kind of special interests people have, what special talents they have, and creatively think about how to use those interests and talents. Think about some different ways to attract new people. At NACAC, we offer some retreats every year, several retreats for either moms or for parents of teenagers. With our youth work, we offer retreats for young people. When you can get people together, if you have the resources to have them together for a couple of days at a time, you're really going to build a sense of camaraderie and community that's going to last over time. You can offer services or training. You can look to how your community's needs could be served by your group. And one of the best ways to retain members is to allow other people to change and to be willing to lead, allow other people to take the leadership role, and also be willing and open and even solicit ideas for how to change and how to develop as a group. Think about some of the stages you might go through, and know that these stages are normal and that you will go through them. You just have to keep moving. So in the beginning, of course, any group, you're going to have a very nervous leader. You might have silent members. You might have people who come and don't stick around. It can be very frustrating. I got an email from someone who couldn't come to this actual webinar, but will listen to it later, that said, you know, I've started this group and so far I only get 2 people that come on any given time. I just want to encourage folks when that's happening to try to stick it out, because even, first of all, even if you're only helping 2 people, that's 2 people that wouldn't have gotten help without you. And over time, and over being consistent and being there when people are looking for it, you'll find that it will grow. You're going to find that the numbers of people change, the people who come might change. As you get more established around stage 3, you'll see that you've got regular membership and much more commitment. You'll also see that people are ready to trust and talk and share more. Now, one of the things as a potential that can happen in the beginning stages, not so much I think with support groups, but it happens occasionally with therapy, and it can happen in a group, is that someone might start sharing too much, too quickly, and then feel vulnerable about coming back. One of the roles that you can play as a leader when you see this happening or potentially happening is to talk to that person who is really sharing, oversharing, and ask them if maybe you could sit and talk about some of their specific issues after the meeting so that we can talk about more general things. It's a nice way to give them a way to back out from going too far too fast, but also from keeping your meeting from derailing. Now in stage 4, and this can happen, there's either a crisis for the leadership, or the founder might leave, or key people might leave. And this is a point in time where folks who are members of the group might say to themselves, we're over. You know, we might just stop having the group altogether. It does not have to be like that. This is an opportunity for regrouping and rejuvenating and taking a look at who's still sitting around the table and making shared decisions about who the leadership should be and what's the direction for our group now. Here are some of the things that we know do help to keep members coming regularly. You really need to keep good lines of communication. You need to solicit new ideas all the time, new participation. As leaders, we have to be very willing to let go of our idea if it's not meeting the group's need. And knowing that there's a time and a place for each idea, and maybe what we wanted to do isn't going to happen this week or this month, but there'll be a time to reintroduce it later. We want to constantly evaluate the needs of the group. We recommend doing maybe 2, at least 1 assessment yearly with your membership to ask them if their needs are being met, what are some of the items of interest that they would like to see covered in the group, what are some activities that they might like to have. Many of our most successful groups have an agenda that they put together at the beginning of every year so that they know what they're going to be doing over the course of 12 months. And that doesn't have to be set in stone, but at least it gives you a vision and it gives you a direction. And it was either Joe or Mary that said earlier, it's very important at the end of every single meeting to get some feedback and an evaluation. And one of the nice ways to do that is this way of asking people to tell about your roses and thorns. What was a rose for you at this meeting? What was a thorn? And obviously the rose is something that really worked for you, and a thorn is something that was a little prickly or you might want to see different. Or it might even be it's a rose and a thorn for you personally in this day, in this week, at this meeting. You want to promote your group. And really, when I say promote your group, you want to use every avenue available. You want to think about community news where you can have a plug. You want to think about TV media outlets where they will do PSAs that talk about community meetings, and they post them all the time. You want to make sure that you have something posted at the grocery store, at the pediatrician, at the school, all the different places where folks are going to hear about and see that you're out there and that you're ready, willing, and able to have new members. And you also want to think about what's your hook, whether it's the way that you choose your name, whether it's the way that you have your meetings, something that really gets people interested and hooks them in. One of our real successful support group leaders from Texas, Bruce Kendrick, hosts something for guys, to get guys out there to support group, dads, and he calls it Dads in Search of the Perfect Enchilada. And every month they go to a different Tex-Mex restaurant, a group of foster and adoptive dads, and they go out to dinner and, have some tacos and maybe a beer or a Pepsi and talk about life. It's a wonderful support group, but they just think of it as a time that the guys are getting together looking for the perfect enchilada. It's a wonderful hook, and he's had great success with that particular support group. You can look to newsletters, e-newsletters, schools, community organizations, faith groups. All kinds of folks have weekly and monthly newsletters where you can put yourself out there. And certainly websites and electronic communication is wonderful. It's the way that everybody is going now. It means that you're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's also a wonderful way to communicate with and keep connected folks who are in rural areas or are isolated or are disabled and can't get out of the home, either for disability reasons or for the reasons of caring for their children. NACAC has been able to host and promote and expand a Facebook support group over the last couple of years that has been wildly successful. I believe we have 800 members on the group. We've not had any issues really with confidentiality or with people being unsupportive or saying things out of turn. And just for one quarter alone, we had 17,000 posts of support and information and camaraderie and advice and hand-holding, and in fact even have helped to find a runaway child of one of the families within just a few hours because of that Facebook support network. So it's a great thing to think about, and again, that Facebook kind of support group is something that we can offer you technical assistance on. Mary, I'm going to take a moment while I am not hacking away to see if we've got any questions that have come in.
Sure, we have a couple, and one I think segues nicely off of the Facebook idea. One is one person asked, "What are your thoughts about ongoing support or connections between group meetings, emails, phone calls, etc.? What are the best ways to do that, and how necessary is it to keep the group together?"
So one of the best ways to do that, to keep them together and keep them communicating in between, that I know a number of groups have done, is they have set up buddy systems between experienced members and new members. And the buddies, the experienced members, make a commitment to just check in once a week or however many times the two folks agree is good, just to check in. How are you doing? What's going on? Need to go and get a cup of coffee. I understand the support group is thinking about doing X, Y, or Z next month. And I know you don't talk much during the meetings. Did you have any ideas you wanted to share? It's a great thing if you don't set up a buddy system for your facilitators or your leaders to really pay attention to who is speaking during the groups and who's not, and make some personal outreach to those folks who are not in between times. Telephone trees are a nice way to keep people engaged in between times. And of course, as Mary and Joe mentioned earlier, if you have a group where you can break down responsibilities according to excuse me, according to task forces or according to subgroups, that's a way for people to get together in between time as well, and really feel like they're committed to and a part of this support community.
Oh, okay. I have
Are there other questions, Mary?
yes, I have quite a few questions. So, one is
Okay.
how important is incorporating food into the meetings?
Food is absolutely essential. People come together over food. Um, some of the folks that we know that are very successful, their support group meeting every month is a potluck dinner or a potluck luncheon, depending on whether they're an evening group or a daytime group. And they may start with an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour of just being together and sharing a meal and sharing some stories and a few laughs before they get into the meat of the group. If you are going to be doing something like that, if you're including food, it's also a nice way to make your support group more of a family group than just for parents or for caregivers. So the potluck piece is where adults and children and youth are all together sharing something. And if you have the resources, you can then divide off into a child's program or a youth program and an adult's program. You can also use food as a way to keep people engaged. So maybe do a round robin that you assign each meeting. There are different one or two people that are assigned to bring the snacks for the group. So if I'm assigned to bring the snacks and I don't really quite feel like going next Thursday, but I'm the person that's bringing the cookies and milk, I'm going to show up because I don't want to let people down. So you kind of do two things at once. You share leadership, but you encourage people to get there. And I've also found over time that even when you're doing advocacy work, if that's where your support group is going, that it's a lot more difficult to stay adversarial with someone once you sat down together over a meal. So breaking bread is a good way to also break the ice.
Great. I have a couple more. Don't go yet. I'm going to combine a couple. One is how long do you recommend for each meeting should be, and then how often? Is weekly too often? Is monthly ideal? What about those two? And then I have at least one other question after that.
Okay. So weekly meetings, I think, can be really onerous. That's one of the nice things about the Facebook group is that the group is there all the time and people use it as needed. But for in-person meetings, ideally, I think people want to go with once a month. When it's too far out than once a month, people don't show up or they forget about it. When it's too close, it's just too much, especially for the leaders to have to do that. Many groups, in terms of how long is the group, will do a variety of things. And that's where I go back to encouraging you to have sort of an annual agenda for what you're hoping to do month by month. So most support group meetings are at least an hour and a half. And I would say an hour and a half to 2 hours is probably ideal for sort of the regular support group meeting. However, a lot of the more successful and more sustainable groups will have those regular hour and a half, 2 hour support group meetings most months. And then once a quarter or twice a year might have something special, like a Saturday, a Saturday picnic that all the families get together, and it might be 4 or 5 hours, and there's games and activities for everybody. Or they might have something around the holidays that's quite special just for the holidays. I know for one of the kinship support groups that I'm connected to, Raising Our Children's Children, which is out of Massachusetts, that leadership has luncheons for the grandfamilies and other relatives 3 times a year. They have one around Mother's Day, not Mother's Day itself, but during the week before or after. They have one around Thanksgiving, and then they have one in the summertime, which is a family picnic for everybody. So that kind of mixing it up with regular support group meetings and events is a great way also to keep people invested and excited about coming.
Great. I'm just going to ask one more, and I'm combining two questions that maybe shouldn't be combined. So, but I'm going to try. One person asked about what about having foster, adoptive, and kinship support groups be together, meaning all the same group versus separate. And then someone asked about when members of the group are at very different spots, some thinking about adopting, some waiting for adoption, some seasoned adoptive parents. How do you keep a meeting relevant to all of them? So I think there's sort of similar questions about diversity in your attendance versus specificity.
Right. And I think this is really a question for facilitators to ask themselves and to ask of their membership about what feels comfortable and what feels doable. I personally think that when you can get people from different backgrounds and different experiences together, they all gain a lot from learning from each other, but it also requires some real specific facilitation skills. In terms of people that are new to the process with people that are experienced, clearly the biggest concern is that we don't want to scare new people off, while at the same time we don't want to paint a picture of something that is not. And we want to also make room for folks that are new to the process to feel as though they can ask their questions and make their comments without being seen as naive or uninformed. So, you know, there's something to be said for having groups that are for pre and new caregivers, and then other groups that are for experienced caregivers, but I see a real value in combining them as well. One of the things that I know, again, with the NACAC Facebook group, the regular Facebook group is for everybody, but then they have also divided into a couple of other specified topic-specific Facebook groups, one for folks who are parenting teens, one for folks who are doing parenting of kids who are in care but with concurrent planning, so that that foster family may become their permanent family. But there's a lot of balancing to do when you're both working towards getting a child that you love back home into their birth family, and at the same time making a permanent commitment to parent them. So that's one way to handle it, is to have the general, but also have some subgroups that can attend to different topics. The one place where I would say absolutely I want to see them all together is if you're talking about groups of youth getting together, kids groups and youth groups. I think ideally you include foster, adopted, and kids being raised by relatives, and even aged out foster kids, all in the same groups, because I think those kids get siloed very often. And we adults worry that they're going to hear things from one another, or they're going to think about things differently if they're talking to one another. My experience with bringing youth together is that when you've got youth from various backgrounds, the sharing is incredibly rich. The commonality is obvious to all of them. And kids that formerly were adamant about never finding permanency are willing to open up their hearts and their minds to the potential. And kids across the board are able to provide each other with some incredible support and understanding. So that's the one place where I would really encourage you to bring kids from across those different kind of placement, permanency, family configurations together.
All right. Thank you, Kim. Let me ask one more here. I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to hold them. But one more I want to ask because we're kind of in the right spot, which is, do you have recommendations about meetings having sort of a very formal structure versus being free-flowing? And then I'll let this be the last one for now.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. So I think ideally what we're seeing and what we're hearing from successful group facilitators is that it's a combination of both of those things. You want to set aside some time in the meeting for people to just be able to talk, to just be able to vent. But you want to be able to facilitate that so that it's, again, not one or two people dominating the whole thing and going in circles. But it is important to have just that place to talk and vent and be parents and normalize that experience of parenting or caregiving. At the same time, there has to be enough structure that you're not going to lose folks for whom process is really difficult. You know, some people like progress and some people like process, and you need to have both. So really, ideally, I think you do want both. I know Mississippi is one of the states where NACAC has been doing a lot of work lately, and they, for a couple of years now, had used their support group meetings and support group time purely for training purposes. So that's where all of their resource parents, all of their caregivers get their training hours that are necessary for licensing and for doing a better job, frankly. But what had been lost in all of that was the ability to provide real support to one another. So they, as a state, have now made a decision to move support back into support groups and to provide training under other venues and at different times so that they're not losing the ability to help people feel supported through difficult times. So yeah, the quick answer is I think it's good to provide both and to be very purposeful and very clear about the fact that you are doing both and delineate your time in such a way that people know when to expect certain things to happen. So in some places, especially if you're doing like an agency supported group, the agency partner will come in at the beginning of the group and provide whatever training or information is important for families to have. And then that agency person will leave the group and go off to another office or whatever so that the caregivers can have time for just a free form conversation and sharing of support and ideas. Are we ready to move on, Mary?
Yes, I have a couple other questions, but I'm going to hold them for another spot so you can keep going. Thanks.
Okay, super. Whoops, so where am I here? Just a few things about staying committed to the process. First of all, I had said earlier, really don't think that your group is better if you can count more people in it. Think about the effect that your group is having on and with and for the participants that are there. You want to stay in touch with your contacts, with your network organizations. And when I say to maintain that contact, one of the things that's really important is to not just be in touch with them when you want something from them. So don't just call and say, we're doing this event, can you please help us with it? But also make sure you reach out and say, is there anything we can do to help you? Or I noticed that you have this new media campaign about maybe healthy kids 3 to 5. Is there something that our group can do to add to that campaign? Can we bring in the foster adopt kinship lens for you? So just think about it in terms of both a give and a take. You want to reciprocate whatever you're asking for. And then finally, really be aware of your own limitations. And one of the tools that I found along the way, which is a great one, I did not send it to Mary to send off to you all, but if you're interested in getting it, I'm happy to send it to anybody. It's the way of looking at any proposal of a new idea or of a new project, of a new direction, and being able to analyze it from the standpoint of, does this meet our mission? Does it speak to the skills and abilities we have within our own group? Do we have the resources to spare? And what are we going to have to give up in order to do that? So particularly when you're thinking maybe about pursuing new funding, do you want to go for a grant that is going to require you to put all the funding from that grant into a brand new program without offering anything to support what you already have going on? That might not be the best choice. It could be a grant for $100,000, but if it's not going to support who you already are, and if the potential is going to deplete your resources or even undo your organization, then you really want to rethink that, and you want to be very clear about what your abilities and limitations are. This is just going back to what we've already said, but it is true. The more and more you get folks involved, the more they're going to feel like they own the group and that they have a vested interest in it continuing. And that starts from day one. Your very first meeting, if you can, set up committees. Who's interested in what, and let's let them take leadership on it. So as you're looking forward, excuse me, there's a few things that you can do. First of all, take a look around your community, your foster adopt kin community, but also your greater community. See what they have going on. See where you can help them expand and improve what they have going on, and see where they might be able to expand and improve what you have. Think about collaborating with other folks. There are service agreements that you can put together and memorandums of understanding so that you all retain your own identity, but you can achieve more and you can achieve it faster when you work in collaboration. And then look at other funding sources, and think about funding sources and partnering in places that are not the typical place. So a great example of this, and this is not a support group, but someone who's been very, very successful over the years is Pat O'Brien with You Gotta Believe, which is it's really an adoption agency for teenagers. But the way that Pat marketed it and wrote proposals around and promoted this particular agency in New York City was to market it as a homelessness prevention organization. New York City has always been very concerned about homelessness. They've had a couple of different mayors over time that have tried to sweep the streets in ways that are just amazing. And so he could get a lot of buy-in by, instead of talking about adoption for teenagers, talking about youth homelessness prevention. Do the same thing with your program. Talk about what you're doing in terms of positive youth development. Talk about it in terms of supporting educational achievement for youth, because we know that when kids are supported and stable in their families, their educational achievement is going to be better. So you want to think about what are some of the tangential benefits of supported foster adoptive kin families and those organizations, and how do they speak to other people in the community, and then connect with those key people. Do some Google searches. Find out who's in a decision-making or in a power position or in a funding position that's outside of our world, out of our adoption foster kin community, but who does have foster adoption or kinship care in their personal life. And then appeal to them from that point of view. I know that you're also a kinship provider. I know that you've also done foster care. I read somewhere that you were adopted. Maybe you'll be interested in what we're doing. And again, as an example, in Massachusetts, we were working very hard back in the late 90s to try to get post-adoption services funded in the state. And we desperately needed, because we had a Republican governor, even though we had a Democratic legislature, we needed Republican support. Well, it turned out that one of the senior legislators, who was a Republican, was also an elderly gentleman. You know, you think of your typical white man in a three-piece suit. That was this man. But he and his wife were raising their 3 grandchildren, had adopted their 3 grandchildren. So he was a kinship caregiver, and his wife was also an adopted person. And so he was a natural go-to who, for the rest of my career in Massachusetts, all I had to do was pick up the phone and give Representative Lepper a call, and he was right there supporting almost anything I asked about. But in turn, I called him all the time too and said, is there something on your horizon that I can help you with? Now, he knew that I was a left-wing Democrat, very liberal, and he knew that I knew that he was a very conservative Republican, but we met in the middle on this important issue, and we were very clear that we could collaborate. So don't avoid those folks that you wouldn't naturally talk to. Look to anybody that can share your purpose around our kids and supporting our families. I'm going to stop here, Mary. The rest of the presentation in terms of the PowerPoint are some resources I want to point folks to, but it's probably a good time to find out what other questions people have.
Okay, I am going to see what we got. So people add more questions, and I'll ask them of Kim. So this is a very specific one, but it ties into some of the political one you were talking about. So this person coordinates a parent group in a public school and wondered what you thought of the idea of writing a newspaper article to the public asking them to contact political representatives about a general need or about an issue in the community.
You know, I've never thought about writing it as a newspaper article, but I think that it's very important, and congratulations, kudos to whoever asked that for realizing that we have to go beyond our own resources and beyond our own networks. It's very important to get other folks in the community when you're doing advocacy work, and particularly when you're doing legislative advocacy or town budget advocacy, anything where people have to make a decision based on the greatest good for the greatest number, which is what supposedly we're thinking about in terms of legislation and funding. So if we're going forward and asking for something for adoptive families, or for grandparents raising their grandchildren, or for foster kids and their caregivers, it's too easy for folks to say, you know what, that's important, but it only serves a small population. The more you can get other folks, other partners and allies out there to make those calls and say, Mr. Senator, Mrs. Legislator, I'm not an adoptive parent, but I know a lot of them, and I know what their kids need, and I want you to know that I'm 100% behind a budget increase to support those kids. Or, Mr. School Board Chairperson, I'm not a grandparent raising my grandchildren, but you know what? My next door neighbor, Sally, is. And that woman works so hard, and those kids are so great. But I really think that they need something extra in the school to help support them. When you can get those folks that are allies in your community to make those phone calls, to write those letters, and to support you and be on your side, and to say, this doesn't affect me personally, but I care about it, it goes a long way.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask one question. I'm going to answer it a little bit and then I'll let you, Kim, you're showing yourself on your camera. Kim?
You okay, Kim?
Are you okay, Kim? Okay. I'm just going to ask the questions. I'm hoping Kim will.
I'm not okay.
Okay.
Am I still on my camera?
You are not. And it's okay.
Thank you. Not really.
Sorry. I am so
sorry.
No, it's okay. I am going to ask this question about somebody asked about research findings that show the impact of these support groups, their effectiveness in helping parents and caregivers and preventing disrupted placements. And I'll answer it a little bit and then let Kim weigh in as well. There is not a lot of research in general about the support, the effectiveness of supports to foster, adoptive, and kinship families, but there is some. And we at NACAC have pulled together some of those research reports that touch on support groups, and we can share that with folks. There are several surveys. Smith and Howard did some early work in this area, and they have some of their surveys talked about that parent-to-parent support was some of the most effective, that parents voted some of the most effective support. There are some other, there's Virginia runs a parent support program, and it also identified the peer-to-peer support as some of the most effective. So again, we have pulled out a little bit of that research and can share that with folks with just sort of certain bullet points from the reports and those that touch on it. But again, it's an area where we need more research, and that's why we encourage everyone to do evaluation of their support groups and really ask people, how and why it's made a difference. But Kim, I'll let you add to that as well.
I would absolutely love to get testimonies from anybody out there that's running groups. Anecdotally, what's it called? Anecdotal data is not data, but it still would very much help. So if people have any illustrations of how the groups have helped families, helped kids, that would just be wonderful to get. And no, there isn't any research. And yes, we need it.
Okay. Um, I'm going to answer a couple sort of technical questions. One I should have answered a long time ago, and I think most people know it. People are asking about a PDF of the slides, and we did send out a link to everyone before the session where they could download the link to the slides and to a couple of these resources that Kim is going to talk about. But we can send that again. And then other people are asking about it being recorded and can they view a link later, and we can definitely send that to everyone as well. But we do have some other questions, so hold on a second. And a number of people have asked for templates, Kim, of a talent survey, of a template to evaluate new ideas, projects, grants. So I think there's some other things that we're going to want that we can send people links to as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, the more you ask for those kinds of things, the better our work will be, because we'll start putting the toolkits together that you really need.
Right. I was thinking the same thing, that that we're going to have a website for Advocates for Families First, which will have a lot of these resources, pulled together in a way, and this is very helpful for us. So let me ask one question, sort of back to sort of support group meetings. And then again, there are a couple of others or bigger questions. Or one is, how do you deal with someone who monopolizes the conversation all the time in a support group?
So Diane Martin Hushman, my colleague at NACAC, is the absolute best at instructing people how to do that and then modeling it when we're doing trainings. It's absolutely crucial that you do it. When it's happening in the moment, you have to just really take the bull by the horns and say something like, Marie, I can tell that this is really, really troubling you, and I want to be able to spend the most quality time I can with you to talk about it. Can we meet for a cup of coffee afterwards so that we can hear from some other folks? Because your issue is so specific and so very important that I don't want to give it short shrift. So that's the really nice way to let somebody know that they're important, that they're monopolizing the conversation, but that you're not ignoring them. You just need to take that offline. Now, if it continues to happen, then you're going to want to take that person aside outside of the meeting. During the break, maybe, if you can, that's the best time. Just even if you don't already have a break scheduled, just ask, do folks feel like they need a break? Take the person aside and say, listen, I really need to ask you to let other people speak for a little while. And again, you're going to be kind. You're going to let them know that you have compassion, that you have understanding, but that, we've got 10 other people in this meeting, and we really need to let them have a chance as well. One of the things that Diane demonstrates beautifully, and I've been on the recipient end of it and know how well it works, is that if you're in a position where you as a facilitator are standing, so for example, if you're sort of doing a bit of a training piece and you're still having a difficult time, or if there's a sidebar going on, she will just literally get up and go and stand near whoever that distracting party is or those parties are, and just put her hand gently on their shoulder while she's talking. She won't change what she's talking about, but the hand on the shoulder is a nice little reminder that lets folks know. One of the things that I often, not always, but I usually do when I'm starting a meeting even, is to say, folks, I know that I'm one of those people that really likes to talk. And it's just the way I've always been a talker. I'm also a good listener, but I know that I need to remind myself sometimes to listen more than talk. So one of the things that I do is I'll put my hands or my fingers on my lips to remind me to keep my lips closed. Now, having said that, at the beginning of a meeting, it makes it a very delicate and subtle but very obvious thing. If I notice that somebody's talking too much, I'll put my fingers on my lips and I'll look at them, and it might remind them, oh yeah, I might be monopolizing the conversation. And lastly, if all else fails, make a joke out of it. Hey, Joe, you got a lot to say? We appreciate it. Can we see what Mary has to say? Or specifically, and Joe Kroll, I'm not talking to you right now, or specifically say to someone who's been very quiet, say, excuse me for just a second, Sue, I know you've got a good point to make, but you know what, John, I haven't heard from you yet. what do you think about this? And so redirect the conversation to someone else. There's a whole lot of different ways to do that. And you really have to find what's most comfortable for you. And oftentimes it's going to be more than one.
Okay, great. Kim, I have a couple more questions. There are a couple people who have very specific questions. We're just going to follow up offline, but there are a couple bigger picture ones
Okay.
that are, and there are two. I'm going to again try to combine two questions that may or may not combine well. One is asking about how do you feel about developing a statewide kinship awareness day? And then there's another question talking about bringing the social justice work to the attention of the support group meetings, meaning, is it okay to use the support time for the social justice end of the organization? I think those two kind of, well, tie in some ways, but anyway, you could answer them together or separate.
Okay, so I'm going to tackle the social justice one first. I think that pretty much you can bring whatever you want into your group as long as you have the consensus and the agreement of the group. So if there's a social justice issue that is affecting a number of kids or families in your group, then it certainly has a place there. On the other hand, if your group has been put together as a say it's a support group that is for parents, caregivers of kids who have been placed across race and culture, so a transracial group. And the issue that somebody wants to bring to the table is the issue of, oh gosh, I don't know, the food kitchen that is not getting enough food and doesn't have enough folks that care about the people that are starving in the community. A little bit off topic. I'm not thinking that your group is going to want to go there. On the other hand, if you have a transracial support group and the social justice issue that you want to bring to the table is something like the Trayvon Martin shooting, and what do we as a community do to take a stand about young Black men being profiled, then that's a perfectly appropriate thing to bring to the table. So you just want to think about, how does it meet our mission? How does it meet our value statements? And what is it that we can bring to the table as a group, as well as what does this issue bring to our group to enhance who we are? So that's how I would look at any of those things, and I'd almost take that same tool I was talking about earlier in terms of doing some kind of a new initiative, and does this meet with what we have, or does it take away from who we are? The second part, or the first part of the question, which I'm answering second, around the Kinship Awareness Day, I love the idea. I absolutely think it's a lovely idea. I think that there have been a lot of wonderful awareness days that different support groups have done over the years. And whoever is asking for that, I would think that Advocates for Families First would be more than happy to offer you some technical assistance in terms of trying to put that together, because I absolutely think kin care providers are sort of an invisible population in all of this. And in fact, any kind of an awareness day for our kids, for no matter how they're being raised, under what setting and with what caregivers, I think it's always great to raise public awareness, but that in particular really speaks to me.
Okay, and Kim, there's just one more sort of set of questions that I don't know if you have anything specific to add. Somebody was asking about funding for these types of activities, including whether NACAC has any funds. And I'll answer that one, which is, unfortunately, we do not. We, over time, have had, mini grant programs, but it just depends on what funding we have to enable that. But I think people wondered if you had suggestions of good places to apply for grants, or good suggestions for grant writing. And then that looks like the last question for now.
Off the top of my head, I don't really have good suggestions that I could just broadly say go here or go there. One of the things that we are doing, and I believe it is in April, this series of webinars is going to have a webinar by two of our expert NACAC family fundraisers, Lori Ross and Phyllis Stevens. And so I encourage you, when you see the invitation, for that one to go to it because they will have more suggestions than I do. But in terms of a kind of a quick answer and some quick ways of trying to solicit funds, I would first go to community businesses and resources. You know, most every community has a Walmart, a Papa Gino's, a Target, um, any number of those stores. It's part of their community giving programs that they do offer funds for different groups. And you have to be a nonprofit group, so that's one of the reasons to get your 501c3. But if you go to them with a good proposal for something that you want to do, they are going to be listening to you at least. And the better your proposal is, the more likely you are to get the funding. The other thing that you can do is there's a number of different websites out there that talk about different grant and foundation funders. If you are lucky enough to know some private family foundations in your community, they have sort of their own policies and they can make their own decisions without as many hoops to jump through. Oftentimes, I know when I was working in Massachusetts, we had this foundation called the Facino Family Foundation that awarded our post-adoption program $50,000 a year. And the only instruction was that we had to do with that money anything that could help a child achieve a permanent family. So we could buy furniture if somebody needed bedroom furniture. We could pay for some moderate renovations. We could pay for an assessment. We could pay for anything that was standing in the way of a family being able to make a permanent commitment. So those family foundations are wonderful. And usually by Googling local, just to Google in your community, for example, Austin, Texas, family foundations, you're going to come up with a list of folks. But again, if there's something in particular that you're thinking about doing, or if you need help with grant writing or foundation applications, that's another area where either NACAC or Advocates for Families First can offer you some technical assistance.
Okay, Kim, I think that is it for our questions, so I'll let you wrap it up. Excuse me.
And I do have one more poll. I have one more poll question I'm going to put out there while we're finishing up, which is an open-ended sort. Well, actually, it's not. It's a checklist. And that will give us some idea of what else we can be doing when we're offering some of these webinar sessions. So the last couple of frames, I just want to bring your attention to some different resources. Joe had mentioned that on our website, we have a couple of manuals. One is the Starting, Nurturing, and Maintaining Adoptive Parent Groups, a guide for leaders. Excuse me, and this is not just for adoptive parents. You can adapt all of this material for relative caregivers or for foster caregiver groups. There's a lot of templates in there, and there's pieces in there that you can just cut out, copy, paste, steal shamelessly. We also have one on developing a parent-to-parent support network. This one is more service network oriented. It's not just that you're providing support for one another, but it's usually a service component in there as well. And then NACAC worked with Adopt US Kids on a number of respite grants a few years back, and we put together a manual around taking a break and giving folks templates for how to create respite care programs in their communities. The last one on this page, Brookdale Foundation, there's actually more information on the following page. Brookdale Foundation has made a real commitment over, gosh, I think it's been 20 years now, to relatives and grandparents caring for their grandchildren. And they have a publications and multimedia site. They have a guidebook for relatives as parents. And then they have another book on promising practices when we're thinking about relatives parenting in rural areas and how to reach them, how to support them. And then another piece that I want you to know about is this national work group called Grand Families Outcome Work Group, and they are always looking for members. Essentially, they are focused on making sure that grand families and relatives raising their kids, that we're paying attention to what the outcomes are and that we are supporting those families as they're doing their work. They are national. Madeline is in California, I believe. She is the executive director, and that is her email there. I also can email, or actually in the packet that Mary is sending out is a fact sheet about GROW, so you can read more about it. And then I want to bring your attention to who the partners are for the Advocates for Families First, because each of us have our own specialties and our own sort of strengths that we can offer, our resources that we can offer. So the three partners and their websites are here: the National Foster Parents Association, Generations United, and the North American Council on Adoptable Children. And then finally, this is my contact information. I welcome anybody to call me or email me directly at any time. I will tell you that emailing me is probably the most direct and effective way to get a response.
Great. Thank you, Kim.
And Mary,
Yep.
Mary, you'll be sending out the schedule of continuing webinars to the folks that have attended?
Yes, I will. And I just want to say a couple things. First, I want to thank Kim for doing this while she's sick, and she did an amazing job hanging in there. And I want to say that there are in the starting and nurturing parent group guide, there's a section on fundraising on the parent group section of NACAC's website. There's also some resources on grant writing and fundraising. So we do have some of those things there as well for people who are asking about those specific resources. And I would say that in the second respite manual done by Adopt US Kids had quite a few ideas that people had, that groups had used to sustain respite programs. There's a section on different types of fundraising activities as well. So you can find a number of resources in there. So I think we will close it. What again?
I just want to thank everybody for your patience with my coughing, my snafus, and my ridiculousness. Next time I do one of these, I will not do it ill.
Yeah, we next time we'll have a backup plan so you don't have to, Kim. I apologize for that. Again, many of the resources, somebody's asking if all the resources you're reviewing are on the NACAC website. They are. There's a parent group section on our website. But I'll say that before this session, we sent out an email. It actually came from Kim's email address, and it had a link to the 2 parent group manuals, as well as the grand families outcomes work group, that fact sheet and the slides for this webinar. Those all went out in an email to you all from Kim Stevens at nacac.org. So if you never know when things are sent to a whole group, if they end up in your junk mail or spam, so look there. But again, we'll follow up with all the things that Kim talked about and make sure you know where to link to them. And we'll also send you a link to the recorded version of the session if you want to look at anything again. And appreciate everyone. I especially appreciate you, Kim, and to let either one of us know if you have other questions. Thank you.